So we have a great panel right now to talk about cloud, big data, the Internet of Things, and kind of all that jazz, and also ask if our heads are in the clouds. But we have kind of the three main facets of this emerging market present here. On the one hand, we have sort of the enabling technology vendor who's selling all the equipment that makes this stuff happen, as well as services. We have the integrated cloud and network service provider, and we have the over-the-top player. So maybe let me just let you each go along and introduce yourselves and also what your company does on the off chance that nobody's ever heard of you, but specifically also what you're doing now as far as your cloud strategy and also things around the related constellation of technologies.
Okay. Hi, I'm Peter Coffey. I'm VP for Strategic Research at Salesforce. I've been there for 8 years, during which time we've moved from being a pretty narrowly defined CRM, software as a service provider, into a much broader suite of what we now call customer success platform offerings, including service, marketing, analytics, and an application development platform in its own right. So even though we still use the Puffy Cloud logo, we're very much more about the tools to make use of the cloud from the point of view of customer behavior, as well as from the point of view of IT modernization and cost reduction. That's really what we do today, and it kind of defies categorization.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Jonathan King with Centurylink, and I noticed from the monitor my head is shining very nicely out there, so hopefully I'm not blinding you guys. I am a Vice President of Cloud Strategy and Business Development with Centurylink, and I'm responsible for our M&A strategy and our partnerships in our product organization. If you're not familiar with Centurylink, we are a integrated telecommunications and IT services company. We have a global network that we offer. We serve both consumer and businesses with that network. We also are a very large co-location provider with 58 data centers globally, and a cloud and managed services provider.
Hi, I'm Anjula Thalreja, and I'm from Cisco. And my role at Cisco is I'm in the services organization. I'm the vice president in the consulting services group, running both the service provider business and the cloud business. If all of you do not know what Cisco and who Cisco is, started off as a networking router switcher company, very prominent in the cloud space, and as you may have noticed, done a lot of acquisitions and a lot of announcements related to cloud. And our point of view is that it is the world of intercloud, where a lot of cloud providers will play an important role in the federation of clouds, as especially enterprises drive hybrid cloud strategies.
So not the cafeteria services provider, Cisco, evidently.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. We're going to
That's
invite
right,
them to
not
this
the
panel.
food company.
That's right. Okay, so maybe the first thing is you all talk to a lot of customers on a consulting basis, on a strategic planning and partnership basis, et cetera. So the first obvious question is kind of what are the trends and or surprises that you're seeing as you talk to customers? I went that way, maybe we'll come back this way. So Manjula.
Yes, I think the speakers this morning talked a lot about the market changing fast, and it is. When 3 years ago we talked to a lot of the service providers on cloud, there was a lot of questions on infrastructure as a service, the infrastructure play. The conversation has changed. The conversation has changed from what are the value-added services and applications that I can provide, especially with the over-the-top players, where, if I dare say, the battle's been lost in some ways, so it's not an infrastructure play. The second is a lot of conversation on Internet of Everything or Internet of Things and data monetization. As service providers who are in the cloud space are driving cloud services, how do they monetize the data that's going through their cloud services? Whether it is in order to drive their own better services and fulfillment and assurance and reducing truck rolls, or it may be related to value-added services that they can provide in terms of energy management to public sector and smart cities. So really large gamut rather than the original conversation that was predominantly focused on infrastructure as a service.
Yeah, I think building on that, what we see across almost all business customers is a common theme of change, and I don't think that's any surprise. But I think beyond technology, companies are looking at agility from an organizational standpoint as well. So if you think about it from a technology standpoint, we really view our mission as enabling business agility. And agility can mean different things to different constituencies inside of a business. So for a developer, agility means I need what I want instantly. For an infrastructure provider, agility might mean I want to get access to a data center in another country where I don't have to build that data center, all the way up. And I think that's sort of our view of it from a technology standpoint. Absolutely, we've recently invested in a data services acquisition, so we see analytics and those things happening as well. But I think a thing which is maybe less appreciated is the organizational and systemic change. I mean, we have a generational change going on, but the pace of change itself is causing the historic hierarchical structures that we have all run our world economy around to really need to work in new ways and develop what John Kotter has described in his book Accelerate, a dual operating system, where we start to think about agile systems, networks, interclouds, multi-clouds, and that trend itself is only going to continue. And I think as a first-time attendee at PTC, one of the things I think is interesting about this venue and this industry is that it's always operated in this co-opetition model, which in some ways we're sort of, there's a perception that telcos move slowly and there's that side of it, but there's another side of it that there's a level of business sophistication and collaboration in this industry that also I think is one that can carry it forward.
So over the course of 8 years, the conversations I've had with the C-suite have changed in many ways. 8 years ago, it was a question of capacity. At that time, Cisco was our only 5-figure deployment with 50,000 seats. They were a marquee customer for us in that respect. And the enterprise simply assumed that cloud was for companies that couldn't afford, quote, real IT, unquote. At that time, a 100 million transaction day was noteworthy for us, and now 1 and 2 billion transaction days on any given weekday are the norm. So capacity, no longer the question. Then it became customizability. And you would hear, well, cloud, that's fine for vanilla functions like a CRM or a service console, but I was told repeatedly, you won't see real ERP with its customizability and mission criticality requirements. Not only do you see it, but there are at least 3 companies that are pure cloud enterprise ERP offerings. So capacity, check. Customizability, check. Now it's compliance. You'll still see sweeping generalizations saying, well, you won't see cloud used in pick an industry that's highly compliance sensitive. And yet, as you heard Hugh this morning from Telstra remind people, the threat vector is what creates the cost, not the size of the protected population. And it's clear that the dynamism and intensity of the threat environment and some of the really in-depth work that's been done on things like the Stuxnet episode have reminded us of the sophistication of the attack environment and how quickly it evolves, and really the economics of security, compliance, governance, and auditability in the cloud are arguably the only way. So you use the phrase cloudonomics in the title of a book. Economics is always about what is scarce. Computing was once scarce, you had to go to the computer. And then Intel and ARM and AMD and others made computing abundant, but networking was still scarce, and you had to take your laptop and find a place where you could plug into a network. Well, now connectivity is abundant. What's the new scarcity? Money is made when you are able to deliver what is now scarce. What's now scarce today is trust, and the ability to deliver trusted confidentiality, integrity, high reliability, and integrity of service. That's where the differentiation opportunity is now, and that's the new cloudonomics, is creating data objects that don't come into the world naked, defenseless, and completely ignorant of their threat environment, but are born trustworthy, born secure. That's where the opportunity is to add value today.
So I was going to actually go in another direction, but that's a good point, so let me maybe ask a follow-up on that and go back this way, which is, ultimately, everyone's concerned about monetization. And as we've seen for many of the over-the-top providers, the monetization opportunities often arise from exhaust data. So I have some transactions with a customer. I'm an e-commerce provider. and I'm just kind of selling goods. But then from that, I have exhaust data that tells me I know what consumer preferences are based on demographics and 5-digit zip, so I can then better target advertising by selling that demographic data to someone.
Yes.
So to what extent does that dichotomy between kind of the need to maintain trusted customer relationships versus the need to, maximize payoff to shareholders and not be accused of financial malfeasance,
Yes.
kind of end up with a balance that is it insoluble, or is there a way to do it?
It's not far from being insoluble. It's the key to brand success today, because merely selling goods is begging to be commoditized. If you aren't wrapping those goods in differentiating services that people actually pay you on an opt-in basis to enjoy the concierge service, it's extraordinary. It's a very Tom Sawyer painting the fence thing. When you harvest data from people without their permission, they will march against you with torches and pitchforks. When you collect data and play it back to them in the form of value-adding services that they may even be paying a premium price to receive, they thank you for the opportunity to give you the data so that you can bring it back to them in the form of value, and which may not just be you. You may quickly become the hub of an ecosystem of those value-adding services. And what I warn people who think the cloud is about cost reduction is that if you become better, faster, and cheaper at doing what was useful to do 20 years ago, congratulations, you'll be an attractive acquisition target for someone who wants to make you a spoke in the supply chain of their service-differentiated brand. So the data, absolutely. If you're not capturing that data and using it to add significant value to what otherwise, what you used to think was your product, then you are just dying to get yourself into a price war with Alibaba and Walmart, and the world only really needs one of each.
I have an additional point of view, which is looking at data monetization, cloud in a slightly different way. If you think about an oil company which has rigs all over the world, or whether you look at large retail companies that have stores all over the world, as a cloud provider, again, this discussion happened this morning. Large data centers, everything centralized, is not the way a market is moving right now. It's about being on the edge.
Yes.
So large amounts of data, trillion terabytes or whatever that's called of data sitting in oil rigs on a daily basis. You can do value-added services, especially for cloud providers and service providers who are masters at data at the edge, and we call that fog computing,
yes,
if I were to introduce a new word. And it's about leaving data at the edge. A customer, an enterprise customer, will pay more if you provided data in a distributed way through fog computing rather than the centralized way of cloud computing. So it's not only about monetizing the data you're collecting, but it is about monetizing the delivery model of data and cloud coming together through fog computing.
So let me come back to you on that in a second if I can, but I didn't know if you wanted to jump in and maybe, given your legal background, also talk about kind of regulatory issues, beyond privacy around data sovereignty and so forth.
You're reading my mind. So no, I thought Peter's comments on trust and then building upon on data, I've said sometimes that privacy is the new security. That we look at these security breaches, and oftentimes there's some kind of information revealed. There's a breach of privacy or confidentiality, and not the type of privacy like what I'm doing in secret over here, but just as a society, as an economy, as individuals, there's an inherent, almost like clean air, clean water that we take for granted of privacy and confidentiality that makes everything work and run. And over the past couple years, I started a degree in I already have a JD, but I was starting this other legal degree, and 10 years ago it was open source, and then I got busy and put it on the shelf. And it was like Rip Van Winkle, because I came back and said, well, open source is done. It's a settled matter. And I looked at privacy, and I started to get involved in this privacy community out there and data protection if you're from the EU. And if you look at the regulation that's coming and the interest in this field, it really is what Peter's talking about in terms of trust, that brands that are trusted, people will share information with. But it's really a double-edged sword, that brands and Target, Home Depot, when that information is revealed, right, in an unexpected way, then trust is eroded. And I think you now see mounting reaction from regulators really around the world who are starting to talk in terms of data sovereignty, data protection, and that is definitely a trend that's going to continue. And we've seen in our own survey results that now it used to be lower cost, agility, security, and now all of a sudden privacy has come as a top of mind item for companies to think about, that they absolutely want to take advantage of this data, but they need to do so in a responsible way so that unintended consequences are avoided.
I think the comparison to clean air and clean water is particularly apt because those are social standards. Individuals will not necessarily choose to pay more for clean air and clean water, and if you left that to a free market of individual buyers and sellers, you probably would not have everybody better off as a result. And it's interesting that you can't buy an electrical appliance in many markets without an underwriter's laboratory sticker on it that guarantees certain minimum standards of safety and integrity at the volts and amperes level. Yep. I don't think we have anything yet that plays that role of setting a minimum floor for data integrity, privacy maintenance, privilege management, and auditability of interaction that would do analogously in the digital realm what the UL sticker does for you in the classical electricity realm. And I think that's something that's really a deficiency in the way we're approaching what's arguably now becoming the more valuable market, which is the market of bits, not atoms.
For someone to pursue. So to go back to, Manjula, what you were talking about earlier as far as fog computing and the sort of the general distributed computing problem and or opportunity, we've got a lot of service providers here in the audience. So I'll start with you first, because obviously this is your base, and to the extent, Jonathan, that you're willing to share best practices and insights for people who may be your competitors, and Peter, for you in the case of certainly the mobile operators, a lot of them are partnered with you. But I guess the sort of the question maybe, or single thought that some of the people in the audience might walk away with is, what would you recommend that they do to take advantage of the emerging opportunities of cloud, big data, Internet of Things, and also maybe by way of explaining that, if there's a great case study example of something that you're doing with a partner, doing with a customer, that's sort of the sterling role model example. If you could share that, I think that would help illustrate the kind of the point.
So let's start with the use case, because to your point, that animates it at the most. So let's take two use cases. There's a major in the United States and another use case in Asia, since this is PTC for the Pacific. In the United States, major retailer around the world, or at least in the United States, that's where they're starting. They are putting video cameras, sensors in their carts to really drive a lot of optimization of number of people that need to be in the cash register. Because the old days, I know when I go for a carton of milk into Safeway in the United States, and I go at 2 in the afternoon, there are not any cash registers because they're expecting people to come in at 5 in the evening after work. And none of us are working 8 to 5. So how do you drive a grocery store now or a retail store with data sitting real time at the edge with cloud services that are coming in through cloud providers? So important to understand the vertical that you're going to go into. And I would say it's not about as many horizontal services that you provide, but being very careful about which is the vertical you want to go after. Do you want to go after retail? Do you want to go after public sector or SMB? SMB in the United States, as an example, next 6 years. Today, 36% of SMBs are using cloud services. Within 6 years, 80% will. A completely different go-to-market, different kind of services, whether it's a vertical market in the enterprise or it is SMB.
So if I could translate that into sort of a direct, actionable recommendation where someone can walk out of here with something on their to-do list, is it to develop a vertical market competence or build a team or work with a partner or
I think it's both. It is how do you go to market in a particular market? I think having watched the service providers over the last 4 years, heavy investments have gone into building the infrastructure, providing the services. The Achilles heel has been the sales transformation and moving to consultative selling versus selling of just based on rate cards, telecom and voice. So same concept. Taking it a further
sorry
higher.
to stick with you on this, but I think this is really like a critical point, right? Because I did strategy for a large service provider for a long time, and the question you always wrestle with is you've got this core infrastructure business,
Yes.
and you'd like to move above it and be more than just a dumb pipe and help add value and create competence, but then you're kind of moving into the area of, I don't know, the formerly IBSG, now Cisco Consulting, or Accenture, Avanade, et cetera. So can telcos actually do that? Can they move into that degree of competency successfully?
Either the telcos do it and transform themselves to really compete, or they partner. So telcos go to market has to dramatically change in terms of how they go into the market, especially if you go into the enterprise space and you go into the business. We've mentioned earlier, the role of CIOs is significantly changing. Does the telco want to go just work with the CIO or the overall business, since the businesses are making major decisions on cloud services? These are key questions to be asked, but which market you're going into is the first piece of the strategy.
Makes sense.
And where you're going to go.
So Jonathan, by the way, if anyone has any questions, I'm going to open it up in 2 minutes, so get ready to ask and maybe hold your hand so you're ready with a mic. So.
Yeah, I think one thing, it's hard for such a diverse group to give maybe something that cuts across all of it, but one thing to think about is what is your own internal operation doing and consuming? And if you're going to offer something to third-party customers, are you yourself using that? And that's one thing that we've used as a yardstick as we've come together on, we've done different acquisitions, but Centurylink IT is using Centurylink Cloud and has engaged teams and expanding training groups that are increasingly looking at how we're moving more and more to Centurylink Cloud. And I think that's one yardstick that you can use, because if you yourself cannot buy what you are selling, then I think you have to stop and say, well, what is really core? I think the second thing is to look at how do you develop products? And are you working in a way where you're getting your results are moving to market in a very agile and rapid way? Have you moved from a waterfall approach to more of an agile approach? Because table stakes for anything up the stack, whether you're building it yourself or whether you're partnering, are really looking very carefully at how you're developing products.
Peter, advice to service providers.
Joe, we absolutely believe that speaking the language of the customer in a vertical domain is critical, is a differentiator, it establishes credibility. And network providers already have achieved the critical first step of having a business relationship and being a trusted provider of a mission critical service. And so adding that sense of, and I'm here to talk about what you do, not to talk about what I want to sell you, is not a big leap, but it's a surprisingly non-obvious leap for a lot of companies. It seems that they want to come in and pitch their SKUs, when what they really should be doing is spending 1 hour, 50 minutes listening to the customer talk about their problem, 6 minutes reflecting back what they've heard, and then 4 minutes saying, okay, here's what we've got that's going to do that for you. It changes the relationship completely.
Quick aside on that. First of all, are there any questions?
Oh, there's one vertical industry example I wanted to add. Oil and gas looks to the person outside that industry as if it's dominated by the majors. Really, the majors are only a small double-digit percentage of the business. Most of that business is this enormous long tail of local specialty operators. And if you look at the history of an oil well, it starts life as a seismic blip and ends life as an environmental reclamation problem. And in the middle, I had one customer say 15 different units of their business that has grown by acquisition of 240 companies over the last 40 years. 15 different business units might touch that place, might touch that hole in the ground with no mutual knowledge of what the other ones are doing. Now, the opportunity for a network provider to become a creative medium in which those 15 units really do start to collaborate. Stop thinking of the temporary owner of the well as your customer, because really the well is a stable object. Its ownership might change. That hole in the ground is, in a meaningful sense, your customer.
Right.
And that's very much a network value add opportunity. Someone earlier in the panel today said ultimately people want to run applications. I actually had to restrain myself from jumping up and saying wrong, because running applications is the naval gun of shooting at a stationary target that you have lots and lots of time to aim at. Today, it's not about running apps, it's about orchestrating a dynamically evolving set of APIs to find value in data and to play that back in the form of services.
Every day in a
Rapidly
turbulent
shifting,
world. So
rapidly shifting.
we're actually out of time, so I apologize if anyone did have a question, but there's an Executive Insight Roundtable that's going to follow up more on these topics, and that's a much more interactive setting. So if you do have questions or want to continue the dialogue, we will see you at, I think, 1 p.m. For the first EIR on this. So with that, thank you very much. Great job, panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you.